19 maids in 14 months. The Harrington estate kept a file on each one. Not a formal file, nothing so deliberate as that, but a record existed, assembled by the household manager, Mrs. Patricia Ellsworth, in the careful way that people who manage difficult situations assemble records. Names. Start dates. End dates. The reason for leaving, when a reason was given. Most of them didn't give one. They simply didn't come back. The file sat in the top drawer of Mrs. Ellsworth's desk, and it was, by any measure, a damning document. 19 women in 14 months. Some had lasted a week. 2 had lasted a day. 1, a woman from a reputable agency with 15 years of household experience, had walked out at 11 in the morning on her first Tuesday, leaving her apron folded on the kitchen counter and a note that said only, "I cannot." No further explanation. The cause of all 19 departures was 9 years old. Her name was Isabelle Harrington. She was the only child of William Harrington, tech billionaire, Forbes listed, owner of the estate, currently in Singapore for the 4th consecutive month, and of Claudette Harrington, who managed the social obligations of being William's wife with the precise, exhausting competence of a woman who had decided long ago that competence was the only available form of control. Claudette was present in the house, but not in the way that mattered to Isabelle. She was present the way furniture is present, there. Functional, unmoved by anything. Isabelle had understood from an early age, too early, in the way that children who are given everything and supervised by no one often understand things too early, that she could do almost anything she wanted within the walls of the Harrington estate, and that the consequences, if they arrived at all, arrived slowly and without much force. What she had done to 19 maids was not violent. It was not dramatic. It was simply relentless. The cold glass of water poured over a freshly made bed. The uniform left soaking in the garden after a carefully timed bucket. The systematic moving of objects so that things were always found in the wrong place. The particular tone of voice that Isabelle had developed, not loud, never shouting, something quieter and colder, that she deployed with the precision of someone who had practiced. She had practiced. That was the thing that Mrs. Ellsworth found most difficult to document. The child wasn't impulsive. She was deliberate. The 20th name in the file was Sofia Reyes. 32 years old. Filipino. 5 years of household experience across 3 families in California, all of whom had provided references so specific and so warm that Mrs. Ellsworth had read them twice. The agency had described her as unflappable, a word Mrs. Ellsworth had underlined because she had never seen it used on a household reference and because it was exactly the word she needed. Sofia Reyes arrived on a Tuesday morning in September with a small black bag, a quiet expression, and something in the way she stood, feet slightly apart, shoulders back, not rigid but grounded, that suggested she was a woman who had decided, at some point in her life, exactly where her center was and had not moved from it since. Mrs. Ellsworth showed her the house. She showed her the schedule. She showed her, with the careful neutrality of someone not wanting to prejudice the outcome, the general location of Isabelle's rooms. Sofia asked 3 questions. What time did Isabelle usually wake up? What she liked for breakfast? Whether she had any allergies? Mrs. Ellsworth answered all 3. Then she paused and said, with the particular delicacy of someone trying to communicate something significant without saying it directly, that the previous household staff had found Isabelle somewhat challenging. Sofia had looked at her for a moment. Then she had said, very simply, most children are challenging when they haven't been shown where the limits are. Mrs. Ellsworth had written nothing in the file that day. But she had, for the first time in 14 months, felt something shaped very much like hope. Sofia learned 3 things about Isabelle Harrington in the first 20 minutes of her first morning. The first was that Isabelle was intelligent. Not bright child intelligent, but genuinely carefully intelligent in the way of someone who observes before acting and who has been observing for long enough to have assembled a significant amount of useful information. She came downstairs at 7:43, 7 minutes before the time Mrs. Ellsworth had given Sofia, and she stood in the kitchen doorway for a full 30 seconds watching Sofia prepare breakfast before she said anything. The second thing was that Isabelle was testing her. The 30 seconds of observation was a test. The breakfast would be a test. Every interaction for the foreseeable future would be a test, conducted by a 9-year-old with the systematic patience of someone much older. The third thing was that Isabelle was lonely in a way that had been there so long she had stopped knowing it was there. Sofia set the breakfast on the table and said good morning. Isabelle came to the table and sat down. She looked at the breakfast. She looked at Sofia. She said, "The last one put the jam on the wrong side." Sofia said, "Which side do you prefer?" Isabelle looked at her for a moment. Nobody had ever asked. The previous 19 had either put it on the wrong side and said nothing or apologized and moved it. Neither of which was what Isabelle had wanted. What she wanted from these interactions was engagement. Someone who would push back. Someone who would stay. She said, "The right side." Sofia moved the jam to the right side. She sat down across from Isabelle with her own cup of tea, something none of the previous 19 had done, and she said, "Tell me what you do in the mornings, before school." Isabelle stared at her. Nobody had asked that either. The bucket incident happened on the 4th day. Sofia had been warned, obliquely, by the previous maid's departure note, the one that said "I cannot," that water was a preferred instrument. She had also been warned by the particular way Isabelle had spent the morning of the 4th day watching Sofia work in the garden. Following her with a quiet attention that was different from the attention of a curious child. It was the attention of someone planning. At 3:47 in the afternoon, Isabelle appeared behind Sofia with a metal bucket. The bucket was full. The water was cold. She poured it. The water hit Sofia's back and shoulders and ran down her uniform and onto the garden path in the particular sudden shock of cold water that is designed to produce a reaction, a cry, a gasp, a turning around, tears, anger, the retreat toward the house and the folded apron on the kitchen counter. Sofia stood where she was. She did not move for 5 full seconds. Then she turned around slowly. Isabelle was watching her with the expression she had used on 19 previous maids, the expression that expected a reaction and had calibrated itself for several possible versions of one. What it had not calibrated for was Sofia's actual expression, which was calm and direct and completely without either anger or distress. Sofia looked at the empty bucket in Isabelle's hands. She looked at Isabelle's face. She said, in the same tone she would have used to ask for the jam, "Was that what you were hoping would happen?" Isabelle said nothing. Sofia said, "Because if you wanted me to leave, that's a much longer conversation. And if you just wanted to see what I would do, now you know." She turned back to the garden and went back to work. Wet. Isabelle stood behind her with the empty bucket for a long moment. Then she went inside. She did not put another bucket of water on Sofia Reyes. Not that day. Not any day after. Sofia Reyes had grown up in a province in the Philippines, the third of 5 children, in a household where resources were counted and distributed with the mathematical care that large families and small economies learn of necessity. Her mother had worked as a domestic helper in Hong Kong for 11 years while Sofia's father raised the children. The money her mother sent home had been precise and faithful and accompanied by letters that arrived every 2 weeks, which Sofia had read and reread until the paper went soft at the folds. She had learned from her mother what it meant to work in someone else's house, the particular discipline of it, the particular dignity of it. Not the dignity that comes from being praised or acknowledged, but the dignity that exists independently of whether anyone notices it. The dignity of doing something well because it is worth doing well, regardless of the circumstances in which it is being done. She had also learned, from years of working in houses with children, that difficult children were never simply difficult. They were always responding to something. The cruelty was always a translation of something that had no other language available to it. Isabelle Harrington was translating loneliness and anger and the particular grief of a child whose parents were physically present and emotionally elsewhere. She was doing it in the only direction that produced a response, toward the people paid to stay. Sofia did not excuse it. She did not ignore it. She simply understood the difference between what was being done and why it was being done, and she worked on both. The turning came gradually, the way most real things turn, not in a single dramatic moment but in the accumulation of small ones. The second week, Isabelle came downstairs early and found Sofia already in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway for a while. Then she came in and sat at the kitchen table. They sat in the same room in a silence that was, for the first time, comfortable rather than hostile. The third week, Isabelle showed Sofia her room, the way children show people things they care about. Pointing out specific objects and waiting to see if the other person actually looked. Sofia looked. She asked about each thing. She did not rush. She did not check her phone. She was actually interested, because she understood that being interested in what mattered to a child was not a strategy but a form of respect. The fourth week, Isabelle asked Sofia about the Philippines. Not because she had been told to be curious but because she had overheard Sofia on the phone with her mother and had heard the change in Sofia's voice, the way it softened and quickened simultaneously, and had wanted to know what caused it. Sofia told her about the province. About her mother's letters. About the way mangoes tasted different in the Philippines than anywhere else in the world, which was a claim she was prepared to defend. Isabelle had listened with focused attention and then had said, "My mother doesn't call from wherever she is." Sofia had said, "That must be hard." Isabelle had said, "No, it isn't." But the way she said it was the way people say things that are exactly the opposite of true. Claudette Harrington returned from New York on a Thursday afternoon and encountered Sofia for the first time in the kitchen, where Sofia was teaching Isabelle how to make rice the correct way, the particular ratio of water to rice, the specific moment to lower the heat, the thing that most people got wrong and the thing that, once you learned it, you never forgot. Claudette stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and watched her daughter lean over a pot with an expression of genuine concentration while a maid explained something technical with the patient precision of someone who actually wanted the information retained. She watched for longer than she intended to. Then she said, "You've lasted longer than the others." Sofia said, "Yes." Claudette said, "How?" Sofia looked at Isabelle for a moment. Then she said, "I just stayed." It was not a complete answer. But Claudette understood, in the way that people understand things they have been avoiding understanding for a long time, that the answer was not really for her. It was for Isabelle. It was the thing Isabelle had needed to know that someone would do. William Harrington returned from Singapore 6 weeks after Sofia arrived. He came back to a house that felt different in a way he couldn't immediately name. Except Isabelle. She met him at the door, not arranged, not prompted, and when he crouched down to her level she told him about the rice and about the Philippines and about mangoes and about a woman named Sofia who had taught her the difference between being still and being afraid. William Harrington had sat on the floor of his own entrance hall with his 9-year-old daughter for 45 minutes. He could not remember the last time he had done that. That evening, he found Mrs. Ellsworth in her office. He asked about Sofia. Mrs. Ellsworth opened the top drawer of her desk. She showed him the file. 19 names, 19 departure dates, 19 empty reasons. Then she showed him the 20th entry. Just a name and a start date. No end date. William had looked at the file for a long time. Then he had gone to find Sofia and told her, in the direct way of a man who had learned that directness was the most honest form of respect, that whatever she needed, whatever salary, whatever arrangement, whatever terms made it possible for her to stay as long as Isabelle needed her, was hers to name. Sofia had considered this for a moment. Then she had said, "I just need to know that staying means something. That someone is paying attention." William had understood. It had taken him 6 weeks and a 9-year-old who knew how to make rice to understand it, but he had understood Isabelle Harrington did not become a different child overnight. That is not how children work. She remained demanding and occasionally difficult, and sometimes the intelligence that made her interesting also made her exhausting. But she was not cruel anymore. Not because she had been threatened or punished or managed into better behavior. William Harrington returned from Singapore 6 weeks after Sofia arrived. He came back to a house that felt different in a way he couldn't immediately name. Except Isabelle. She met him at the door, not arranged, not prompted, and when he crouched down to her level she told him about the rice and about the Philippines and about mangoes and about a woman named Sofia who had taught her the difference between being still and being afraid. William Harrington had sat on the floor of his own entrance hall with his 9-year-old daughter for 45 minutes. He could not remember the last time he had done that. That evening, he found Mrs. Ellsworth in her office. He asked about Sofia. Mrs. Ellsworth opened the top drawer of her desk. She showed him the file. 19 names, 19 departure dates, 19 empty reasons. Then she showed him the 20th entry. Just a name and a start date. No end date. William had looked at the file for a long time. Then he had gone to find Sofia and told her, in the direct way of a man who had learned that directness was the most honest form of respect, that whatever she needed, whatever salary, whatever arrangement, whatever terms made it possible for her to stay as long as Isabelle needed her, was hers to name. Sofia had considered this for a moment. Then she had said, I just need to know that staying means something. That someone is paying attention. William had understood. It had taken him 6 weeks and a 9-year-old who knew how to make rice to understand it, but he had understood Isabelle Harrington did not become a different child overnight. That is not how children work. She remained demanding and occasionally difficult, and sometimes the intelligence that made her interesting also made her exhausting. But she was not cruel anymore. Not because she had been threatened or punished or managed into better behavior. Because someone had stayed long enough to show her that the cruelty wasn't getting her what she actually wanted. And that what she actually wanted, attention, engagement, someone who would push back and remain, was available by other means. Sofia Reyes stayed at the Harrington estate for 3 years. She left when Isabelle was 12, enrolled in a school that finally challenged her appropriately, with a social life and a sense of herself that had not existed before. Sofia left because Isabelle didn't need her anymore in the same way, which was the best possible reason to leave. Mrs. Ellsworth closed the file in her top drawer. She did not open a new one. William Harrington restructured his schedule so that he was home 4 days out of every 7. He never fully reclaimed the years when Isabelle had been small and he had been in Singapore. But he built something in the years that remained. Claudette Harrington enrolled in something. She came home from it on Thursday evenings quieter and more present, and once she sat down in the kitchen next to Isabelle and asked if she would show her how to make rice. Isabelle showed her. The ratio of water to rice. The exact moment to lower the heat. The thing most people get wrong. She got it right on the second try. There are children who are difficult because they are broken. And there are children who are difficult because they are full of something, intelligence, feeling, energy, that has nowhere to go and no one to receive it. Isabelle Harrington had been the second kind. Sofia Reyes had understood the difference before she had finished her first cup of tea on the first Tuesday morning. The file that Mrs. Ellsworth had kept for 14 months, 19 names, 19 reasons, the careful record of 19 women who could not stay, was eventually moved to the back of a cabinet and then, in a general office reorganization 3 years later, thrown away. Nobody missed it. The 20th name was the one that mattered.